Try not to embarrass us tonight, my uncle whispered as I parked the car. I nodded, got back in, and took the cake, the gifts, and their reserved venue key with me. 2 hours later, I got a text from my nephew. Everyone's just standing around. What happened? I, 32M, still remember the exact moment my uncle's words hit me like a slap across the face. The parking lot of the Riverside Event Center was buzzing with activity as families streamed toward the entrance, carrying colorful gift bags and wearing their Sunday best. I had just pulled up in my 10-year-old Honda, feeling proud that I'd managed to scrape together enough money for a decent gift and had even volunteered to pick up the custom cake from the bakery that morning. My uncle approached my car window with that familiar look of disdain he'd perfected over the years. He leaned down, his expensive cologne wafting through the open window, and whispered those words that would change everything. Try not to embarrass us tonight. The way he said it, like I was some kind of liability, some stain on the family's reputation that needed to be managed. I nodded, forcing a smile, but something inside me snapped. This was my nephew's graduation party, a kid I'd helped raise when his parents were too busy climbing the corporate ladder. I'd been the one teaching him to ride a bike, helping with homework, taking him to baseball games when everyone else was too occupied with their important lives. Yet here I was, being treated like an unwelcome guest at my own family gathering. Without saying another word, I rolled up my window, put the car in reverse, and drove away. In my back seat sat the 3-tier custom graduation cake that had cost me 2 weeks of lunch money, a stack of wrapped gifts I'd carefully selected, and most importantly, the venue key that my aunt had entrusted me with earlier that day because I was reliable and would definitely be there early. The irony wasn't lost on me as I drove back to my apartment. For years, I'd been the family's go-to person for anything that required actual effort. Need someone to house sit? Call me. Need help moving? I'm your guy. Need someone to coordinate the catering for a family event? Obviously, I'm the only one responsible enough. But when it came to actually being treated with respect, I was apparently just the embarrassing relative who drove an old car and worked a blue-collar job. I spent the next 2 hours in my apartment, staring at the cake on my kitchen counter. The bakery had done an incredible job. It was decorated with my nephew's school colors, had his name written in elegant script, and even featured a small fondant graduation cap on top. The gifts were wrapped in coordinating paper, each one chosen specifically for his interests and future college plans. The venue key sat on my coffee table like a small metal symbol of the power I'd never realized I held. My phone had been buzzing intermittently, but I'd turned it face down, not ready to deal with whatever drama was unfolding at the venue. When I finally picked it up, I saw a series of increasingly frantic messages from various family members. The first few were casual check-ins, asking where I was. Then came the concerned messages wondering if I'd had car trouble. Finally, the panic set in when they realized the venue was locked and no one could get inside. The message that broke my heart came from my nephew himself. Everyone's just standing around. What happened? I could picture him in his graduation suit, probably confused and disappointed, watching his family members argue in the parking lot while his celebration fell apart. But I also thought about every family gathering where I'd been treated as less than. Every time my uncle had made snide comments about my job, my car, my apartment. Every time my aunt had introduced me to her friends with that apologetic tone, as if my existence required an explanation. Every time I'd been excluded from family photos because I didn't fit the image they wanted to project. I texted my nephew back, telling him I was sorry and that I'd explain everything later. Then I turned my phone off completely. Update 1. The next morning brought a storm of voicemails and text messages. My aunt was furious, demanding to know how I could be so selfish and irresponsible. My uncle's messages were predictably condescending, suggesting that my behavior proved exactly why they'd been concerned about me embarrassing them. Other family members chimed in with their own versions of disappointment and anger. But buried in all the outrage was a message from my nephew that made me reconsider everything. He'd managed to get my number from his parents and had sent a long text explaining how confused and hurt he was. He didn't understand why his party had been ruined, why his family was fighting, or why I hadn't shown up for him. That message gutted me. In my anger at being disrespected, I'd hurt the one person who had never treated me as anything less than family. My nephew had always looked up to me, had always been excited to see me at family events, had never made me feel like I was somehow inferior to the rest of them. I realized I needed to make this right, but not in the way my family expected. I drove to my nephew's house that afternoon, bringing the cake and gifts with me. When he answered the door, still in his pajamas with that dejected look that broke my heart, I asked if we could talk privately. We sat in his backyard, and I explained everything. How his father's words had hurt me, how I'd felt disrespected by the family for years, and how my anger had gotten the better of me. He listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed he was really trying to understand. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before telling me that he'd always noticed how differently his parents treated me compared to other family members. He'd never understood why, since I was the one who actually spent time with him and seemed to care about his interests and achievements. We ended up having our own private graduation celebration right there in his backyard. We ate cake, opened presents, and talked about his plans for college. It was more meaningful than any fancy venue party could have been, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly valued by someone in my family. Update 2. Word of our private celebration got back to the rest of the family, and the reactions were as divided as I'd expected. My aunt was livid, accusing me of trying to turn her son against them and of being manipulative. My uncle doubled down on his original position, claiming that my behavior at the graduation party proved he'd been right to be concerned about me. But something interesting happened. Other family members started reaching out to me privately, sharing their own experiences of feeling judged or excluded by the more affluent members of our family. My cousin told me about how she'd been made to feel ashamed of her divorce. My brother admitted that he'd always felt like his career in teaching was looked down upon compared to my uncle's business success. It became clear that I wasn't the only one who'd been walking on eggshells around certain family members, trying to meet impossible standards of respectability that seemed to shift depending on their moods. My nephew, meanwhile, had apparently confronted his parents about their treatment of me. He'd asked them directly why they felt the need to make comments about my car, my job, and my lifestyle when I'd never done anything to hurt them. According to him, they'd been defensive and dismissive, which only reinforced his growing understanding of the family dynamics he'd been too young to notice before. The real turning point came when my nephew announced that he wanted me to be the one to drive him to college for move-in day. He told his parents that I was the family member who'd been most supportive of his education and that he trusted me to help him start this new chapter of his life. The request was simple, but the implications were clear. He was choosing to align himself with me rather than with the family members who treated me poorly. Update 3. The college move-in day became a symbolic moment for both of us. As we loaded his belongings into my old Honda, I couldn't help but think about how my uncle would probably cringe at the sight of his son's college arrival being facilitated by my embarrassing car. But my nephew didn't care about appearances. He was excited about his future and grateful to have someone who genuinely supported his dreams. During the drive, we talked about family, respect, and the importance of treating people based on their character rather than their circumstances. He told me that watching the aftermath of his graduation party had been a wake-up call for him about the kind of person he wanted to be. He'd realized that wealth and status meant nothing if they came at the cost of treating family members with cruelty and condescension. When we arrived at his dorm, I helped him carry his boxes upstairs, meeting his roommate and getting him settled in. As I prepared to leave, he thanked me not just for the ride, but for teaching him an important lesson about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. The drive home was bittersweet. I was proud of the young man my nephew had become and grateful that our relationship had survived the family drama. But I also felt a profound sadness about the relationships that had been damaged, possibly beyond repair. In the months that followed, the family dynamics shifted permanently. Some relatives made efforts to rebuild their relationships with me, acknowledging that they'd been complicit in creating an environment where I felt unwelcome. Others, particularly my uncle and aunt, remained convinced that I was the problem and that my actions had been unforgivable. My nephew and I stayed close throughout his college years. He'd call me regularly to share his experiences, ask for advice, and update me on his academic progress. During holiday breaks, he'd often choose to spend time with me rather than attend family gatherings where the tension was still palpable. The graduation party that never happened became a family legend of sorts, referenced in hushed conversations and serving as a dividing line between those who understood why I'd acted as I did and those who saw it as an unforgivable betrayal. But for me, it represented something much more important. The moment I finally stood up for myself and refused to accept being treated as less than worthy of basic respect. Looking back, I don't regret my decision to drive away that night. Yes, it caused pain and disrupted what should have been a celebration. But it also forced conversations that needed to happen and revealed truths about our family that had been hidden beneath a veneer of polite dysfunction. Most importantly, it strengthened my relationship with the person who mattered most, my nephew, who learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable bad behavior, even when it comes from family. The cake, incidentally, was delicious. We finished it over the course of several days, and every bite reminded me that sometimes the best celebrations are the ones that happen away from people who make you feel small.